Hi, welcome to Both Sides of the Desk. I'm Charlie Charlton, and each week we have one boss, one employee to talk work culture. Why? Well, as a journalist, I host a lot of business conferences, and it is the one subject that always comes up. How do we create and keep happy, high-performing teams? So to give the honest, sometimes emotional answers to that, we have Mesma. They're experts in quality assurance and improvement for the education and employability sectors, and they're based here at Newcastle Helix. On one side of the desk, we have Mesma's co-founder and CEO Louise Doyle. And on the other side of the desk, we have Mesma's marketing manager, Sally Forsyth. When we talk about female-dominated workplaces, inevitably childcare is the thing that comes up first. Yeah. But you feel that there's a whole other, perhaps bigger, longer-lasting consideration that needs to be made.
Yeah, I really do. I mean, I think that it's something that it's a political issue, and I'm trying not to go down a political route with it, but I think a lot of people who are maybe my age or a little bit older than me, so I'm in my early 40s just still, so I think that a lot of us in this age bracket are experiencing the other side of care and responsibility, so that comes down to parental care. So I think that I'm in a situation where my mum has recently needed more support from us as a family, and I've done that thing where I've moved to university and then ended up living in the place that I went to university. So I've left my family behind, and it's me looking after my mum who followed me up. So that's, and I think that there's a massive recognition of that, but I don't think anyone's come up with a sensible solution to that at the moment. And I think that that's hard for the people that are experiencing it, and I think it's really hard for businesses, and in particular smaller businesses, to deal with that as well.
Do you mind me asking why your mum needs more?
My mum has Alzheimer's, and she's recently been diagnosed with Alzheimer's.
So what impact does that have on you on a day-to-day basis?
Well, it has an impact on us because I have to support my mum with remembering things. I have to support my mum. My mum lives with us, or we live with my mum, depending upon where we're up to. We've also got two children who are 9 and 12, so we've got care and responsibilities on both sides. And like I said, there's only me and my husband, and it requires an awful lot of logistical movement and consideration and planning, forward planning, and the support system isn't there.
There are two elements there. One, which is an older population and an older workforce, and increasingly people in Sally's position of being sandwiched. Have you come across this before, or is this something that you're very aware of?
When I've worked in corporate, so if I kind of put that hat on of being in a corporate world, and maybe it's a sign of the times as well about our willingness and our interest in people as people when they work with you, that you're not just a number in a corporate, but there was definitely, for me, a line between your work and your home life that, yes, you knew things about each other, but not to the extent that that's amplified. And I think that is a sign of the times, but also in a small business, because you know the person, you don't just know the person at work. And that's probably the thing that has become more and more apparent over the last couple of years. But I was kind of adding up, you know, if you look at Mesma over the last couple of years, in a team of less than 10, we have had cancer diagnosis, we've had death of a parent, we've had divorce, we've had mental health difficulties, we've had Sally's really challenging situation. I could go on with others that have affected people in our team. So you're never dealing with just one person's life and scenario. You've got all of them going on at the same time, and trying to make that work it is challenging. You know, there's no two ways about it. I think what you can do as a small business, or certainly we do, and I know many others do the same, we have the flexibility to say you work when you need to work. You know, if you want to work it till midnight and not during the day, that's what we'll do. You're not constrained by HR policy process that understandably have to be in place in a bigger organisation. So I think it gives us that element of flexibility. Sally, may have a different view on that, so it'd be good to hear Sally's take on that. That allows us to manoeuvre around it in a different way. However, it creates a bigger risk of burnout. That's the thing that keeps me awake at night. My own burnout, my team's burnout, Carole's burnout, about how do you not just protect the person from the work that you're all trying to do to make Mesma successful, but actually protect them as well, as much as you can and as much as they want you to, from what's going on in their life outside of work as well.
I think that if you're going to do a contrast between a corporate environment, and I've also worked in larger organisations before I worked for a small business, I think there's more flexibility in managing roles and responsibilities. I think it's much harder. There's no one there to pick up the slack if you're in a small business. So if you've got a work ethic, like I've got a work ethic, you know that this is your job, and sometimes it's harder to just let things go a little bit, because you feel like you're losing grip on your job a little bit, and you don't want to do that. So
what I'm hearing from Sally is it feels like a very typical sad story, actually, for a lot of women, that all the data says it's still the women who are the primary caregivers, whether that's to their children or whether that's to their parents or their loved one or their friends, rather than men. So if you're working in a world where you have predominantly employed women, your business is going to be more impacted, whether the political situation changes or not, because that's the narrative, that's the story.
Yeah.
So do you then look to recruit women if this is going to be the challenge you're going to be faced with?
I think you make a really interesting and challenging point, which is we kind of think we've gone past those years of, it became a bit of a joke, didn't it, of not recruiting women who might be of childbearing age, whether that was overt or not, because of the risk of them going off on maternity and then having responsibilities for young children. And that doesn't, feed the conversation as much now. But equally, this version of us being fitter in our middle years, our parents living longer, whilst all the research is there that supports that, what we aren't doing is having that conversation openly around. This is more likely to fall to the women. So therefore, and let's add in the fact it's menopause era as well. So you've got all of these whammies of probably having children later in life, so our children are still school age and younger. You've got parents who have to be looked after, and your own personal scenario that's going on in the middle of that. And it's good to see that those changes and those conversations are getting better and there's more there. But I think Sally's spot on, the conversation about how do we support staff, recruit without bias, and then support staff to be able to navigate that needs, for us in Mesma, more thought and more consideration. But it's not just about us,
So Charlie, you've used a phrase before when you said and not in this conversation, but you've said you can't have everything, you can't have it all, and you're kind of expected to. And that's where it gets hard, because you think, well, why can't I?
You're frustrated.
Yeah, very.
Because you're ambitious, you're talented, you've just been told now that your job is entirely secure, and yet I'm sure there's something at the back of your mind, can I sustain this? Can I sustain this pressure of looking after my mum, looking after the children, pushing on at work, taking on new and exciting projects that you actually want to do, because that's your work culture. Yeah. Your work culture isn't settling.
No, never.
It's always
don't even
pushing
know what that
higher
looks
and higher. I'm not meaning to upset you both.
No, I just get upset when she gets upset because I know what she's having to do.
But that is it, isn't it? So what can an employer do in that sense? Is there anything apart from the arm round the shoulders and saying, you're doing a great job?
But in some ways, you don't want to be pitied. So this is the other thing.
Would that feel like pity?
Yeah. Because
not understanding.
In some ways, yeah, but in some ways, no, because we've been to these, we've had these conversations. So there's also a thing. In some ways, this conversation irritates me because we're only having it because we're women. And it irritates me because it's that separation of work and home. And actually, I've not worked I've given up enough, you know, but it's that thing of, I don't want to give up the other things. So I can't be a mum and be head of marketing and be a full-time carer and bake cakes and do 3-mile bike rides on a weekend and have a Springer Spaniel. I can't do all those things because there just aren't enough hours in the day. I said to you, didn't I? We don't really want to have conversations about the menopause. We don't really want to have conversations about those things. And it's not because I'm playing them down, or I'm not because I don't think we need to have those conversations, but we need to have them with men. We need to have men sat around the table talking to them because they share 50% of the responsibility for care for older people and for children.
There's something about controlling the controllables for us. So in the situation where we're talking about Sally's, and you could apply that to any of the others, scenarios, is having high expectations of ourselves is really important in terms of what we do, because actually the role that we have with our clients demands high expectation. We're in a quality management business, so quality has to permeate through everything that we do. Where that, I think, sometimes causes us some challenges is the bar that we set for ourselves is incredibly high. So maybe that's something we've got to think about, is what does that look like where can we lower the bar? Where is gold standard not needed? Where is it that we can let things go that we're not letting go because actually we want to do them and we're excited for them? My worst and best feature is I've got an idea. Let's do it. Let's do this. This is a great idea. That's marvellous in one extent because it keeps us alive and it keeps us fresh, but then it ends up in Sally's workload.
I don't mind kicking a few 50, 60-hour weeks around. That isn't an issue for me at all. It's the fact that it almost feels unfair to me that I can't do that in some ways, or that it costs so much to me personally or to my family to be able to do those things. It feels unfair because I think, 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, wouldn't have been an issue. I would have just done it. It wouldn't have been fine. It would have been fine. I wouldn't have felt so tired at the end of it. I'm not even going to, let's say, age would be a consideration because it just wouldn't, and I've still got loads of energy. It's nothing to do with that. It's to do with the fact that you've only got so many hours and so much capacity in the week to
and
be
you've
able
got
to
another
do
job
things.
there. The parental care is another unpaid job that's taking your resources. And so what could an employer do about that? Because I know you didn't want to get into policy and politics. So is there anything that an employer could do?
I don't think it's up to the employers to deal with the scenario. I think it's up to the government to make the changes. So employers will do what they can do within the restrictions that they have because they have a business to run.
Don't be so understanding. Forget that there's any help that's going to come from no matter which political party. So we're not talking policy here. I'm thinking things like with childcare, there are firms that we've spoken to who adjust the diary so that the parent can be on the school run. Yeah. So they can do the school run, then come back, pick up their work as they get on, and they've adjusted that. Are there any things like that?
That already happens, so that's okay. So everything that a business could do, Mesma probably have done, and that's partly due to, Lou and Carole making those decisions, but also because the world of work has moved on. What would those examples be? So having flexibility in when you can work. Hours and locations as well, I genuinely don't expect my employer to do anything to support me in my scenario. I think I have personal responsibility for what happens outside of the hours that I get paid to work, and so I have to deal with those. I think there's an understanding element, which is what Louise was talking about in terms of if I have an issue that I'm dealing with now that I didn't have to deal with a couple of months ago, have some understanding and be able to be flexible about that. I think that's as much as I can expect them to do. So what have you offered, or what would you offer?
And your advice for other firms in this situation, things to consider?
So the advice for the firms is, I don't know how you can function these days without building flexibility into what you do. I fully appreciate there are some sectors that's a no-go. So if you work in the care sector, you work even in retail, you know, we have a flexibility because of the nature of what we do, and therefore I'm mindful of that in what I'm about to say. So those things, like the simple things like the school run, the appointments for doctors, speaking to medical people, there are those things that affect all of us in different ways that I think you're nuts if you're not already thinking about how you build that level of flexibility into your workforce, because I am absolutely confident we get back in spades what we give out, so and more on top of that. So that for me is the number one, is how do you make that work? I think again, if you can, again some sectors can't, then the model of home v office work is important because it allows for some of that. I worry about it for different reasons about that model, but I think it does help up to a point, you know, the fact that we've got that in place. The things I think we haven't put enough thought into are things like how might that look with not talking about Sally's situation necessarily, but actually less hours. So rather than it just being about the times you can work, is there a period of time where you can reduce someone's hours because that works for them with an absolute cast iron guarantee? When this is finished in 6 months, a year's time, whatever it is, then you come back to full-time working. Maybe for some people that works. Maybe there's people who want sabbaticals in order to deal with it. That's tough when you're a small business to make that work. That doesn't mean that we can't make it work. For me, the one that is the most controllable of any of those things is around how we look at the expectation on workload. That's the one we haven't sat down in a targeted and concerted way and said, let's have a look at what's on your plate, and does this make sense because of what's going on for you, you know, outside of work? Coming back to your scenario specifically, I think that conversation, we have the conversation around and about. We don't have that conversation in a way that I feel that, you know, we should have done. It's amplified in a small business to a point where you can't not encroach in people's private lives in order to be able to say, well, actually, how can we make this work better? Because when someone is underperforming in a small business, you know it, don't you? So actually, if any of us were, and at different times there's peaks and troughs with everyone, where you know you're at the top of your game, and then you don't know the next month you may think, oh my God, I'm an absolute bloody waste of space. You know, what am I doing here? I'm not adding anything to this business. Everyone will go through that, I imagine, within, maybe it's just me, in their own jobs. You have the peaks and troughs of it. But when people are having the trough and you have some insight into what's happening for them outside of work, then you can navigate that sometimes better. I'm not saying we do it well, by the way. I think there'll be times we've done it well and times I'm confident we haven't.
One thing that SMEs do beautifully, it's their bread and butter, is develop very strong client relationships. I think you said this, Sally, that you're not just the marketing manager, you are the therapist.
Well, no, not me. So the team more than me, as well as anything else. And all of us have got different clients that we've got closer to. And I think you do that anyway in any business. But I think there's something about the nature of Mesma and what we do with our customers that is different. And I think you know, I think I made a couple of points around things like we don't put an awful lot of client notes on the system because of just the nature of the business and what we do with our customers. So actually, it's because, you know, we've built those relationships over time. I know that if people have an issue or outside of working hours, they wouldn't be afraid to get in touch with Louise or Carole about that, or any of the other associates in the business. And I don't think you always get that level of personal relationships with your customer base that we have here.
So as the company grows, how do you nurture that? How do you sustain that? A lot of really large companies go full circle, don't they? And think, we did really well with our staff. Where did that go?
Absolutely. I think I hate using the word strategically because it's so dull, isn't it? But there you go, it's on the table now. I think about that a lot around our probably one of our biggest unique selling points. I've done two. Look at me going on business. If I look at that unique selling point of us, one of them is about our client relationships, as Sally said, the strength of relationship and the bond that we have, and it's okay to send that message at 10 o'clock at night because you've got a regulator in and you're worried about something. That's okay, and we'll respond to that. Is also our Achilles heel when we start to think about how we grow that. So there are things that I do personally, because I go out and still deliver consultancy, I still deliver events, I don't imagine not doing that, that we struggle a little bit to think about how we extract me from those types of activities. And actually, if we're going to grow, that has to happen. It's not just me, that applies, you know, across the board in different ways. So we have to think that through really carefully, and to think, I think about what is the DNA of that relationship structure. So actually, it's not just built on that personal relationship that you've established over time, but we extract the DNA from that so it becomes something that can be replicated as much as that is possible. There are some of our clients who we don't have that close relationship with because they don't want it with us. They don't need it. They buy the software, for example, and that's all they want. You know, it's a commodity that they use in order to do what they need to do. There are others that we know, probably some of them as well as we know our own team. Some of them actually arguably better because of how tight that bond is between us.
So is that a mixture of internal comms and external? Or is it just how do you keep those core values through the firm, no matter how big it gets?
I think if you try and force it, it won't happen. So I think there has to be a need from your customer to want to embrace that as part of being a feature of the business and being a feature of what you get from working with Mesma, because I think there's a need for it amongst the professional group that we work with. So if you were to try and do it maybe in a different sector where they perhaps didn't have that need for that, then they would go, actually, I just really want to buy a bit of software off you, or I just really want to buy, or I just really need your support to fix this problem. I don't necessarily want to then become part of a community, you know, thank you very much, but I'll leave it there.
There's a real fine balance with that, and I think, you know, I'm reluctant to step into the AI space, but I think that as we head into that world of where does the human element of the way that you engage with your clients get retained, you know, I'm sure everyone who's listening to this or watching it can immediately think of, I know what my inbox looks like at the moment, or my LinkedIn DMs, which is just a stream of AI generated blurb that I just delete the whole lot of them. You know, that's not client relationship based from any part of the journey that you have with your clients, whether they're a prospect through to someone that you work with as a customer. So I think the people who navigate that well are the businesses that are going to be successful. Just something you said before that I thought I'd come back on, where you said about, is it about how you internalise it, your values, to give you an example of it. Where I think values can be dangerous, which is a really weird sentence. I see your face, Charlie, look at me as if to go, what are you talking about? And this is a Mesma example, is I'm so hell-bent on delivering to what I think we stand for that there are times what I drive our team to do puts work pressure on them. And I'll give you a perfect example of this.
Uncompromising.
I don't think I'm uncompromising, but there are things that I'm less willing to compromise on. So I'm going to give you the example to work that through. Yeah. I'll give you the example of that, so you don't think I'm going completely mad. I'm very clear that, and we've done a fantastic job of it, we're well known for it, it's given us a huge marketing boost, that half of our business, half of our team were recruited as apprentices, including Sally, into her role. We take on T-level placement students. We took on a Kickstart placement when that happened during COVID. We take on internships. That's fabulous because all of that speaks to what we stand for and our values. But then what comes with that is a tsunami of workload that hits our team. Would that be fair?
Yeah.
In that
because you
happening?
need to support that person.
Because you've got to
role.
support them.
Yes.
You've got to make that happen. And I'm so uncompromising on that. around, we have a responsibility in the northeast of England. We have the highest young people who are out of work. We have the lowest number of apprenticeships. We have a very high number of SMEs. We have very few big corporate businesses. So if we're not going to do that, who is going to make that happen? And also, we sell into that sector. So how can you possibly sell into that sector if you can't walk the talk of that as a business yourself? So there's lots of reasons why we do that and are very thoughtful in making that happen, and there have been successes around that. However, the however is, and we've had a conversation earlier in this podcast about workload and pressure and personal life and so on, and there are things that I direct that I have to be more mindful of. So your values can underpin what you do, but there is a point where you're not giving up on them, but recognising and responding to the impact of living them sometimes.
So I think you've got a responsibility to your team to make sure that they're supported and they have the workload. I think you've also got responsibilities to that individual to make sure that you're in a position to be able to support them. And because we all understand that and know what's required of that, and maybe slightly reluctantly agreed to it because we knew what was required, because we know that that support is needed. I think that that's better than just saying, no, I'm not going to do it, because actually what you get from putting yourself in that situation is you get new ideas, you get fresh talent, you get that responsibility, social responsibility part of it, which we do need to have more of in the North East. So I think it's I think you have to do it and just be very aware of the responsibility that comes with it as well.
Because I was just thinking about return on investment. I'm not necessarily meaning in terms of finances, but time and resources. That if you're putting that energy into apprentices, and you support apprentices in later life as well, don't you? You're very keen on that. So there's kind of like second careers, and we've talked about older population, older workforce, giving that opportunity there. You want to get it back at the other end.
You do. I think with apprentices, the ROI is really clear. I wouldn't change that for the world. We operate with Mesma an apprenticeship-first policy, which is if we need to recruit a new job, we have to talk ourselves out of why it shouldn't be an apprenticeship rather than into it. And I think that's a fundamental difference with lots of other businesses who, assuming they don't pay the apprenticeship levy, which has got a different reason for doing it. If you're a small business and you don't pay it, talking yourself into it is a very different mindset to talking yourself out of it. So that's what we do. We start with it. It's going to be one unless we prove why not. And our apprentices that we've taken on, Sal being one of them, have been exceptional. And that's from a school leaver who didn't want to move into university, to Evan, who is a professional rugby player and it's his second career, to Liam, who had a business as a personal trainer and it went under during COVID, but he had shown some real aptitude around web development, to Sally, who was looking for a different career and a real drive and interest in marketing. So there is not a single bit of that I don't think the pain points, if I can call it that, and the perfect example of that would be that we have gone down for our staff members who want it to a 4-day week. So we've offered that to everyone and said, if you want to work a 4-day week, then you can do that. For some of our staff, for reasons you now know and love, that's not necessarily the right option. So we carry on with a different flexibility until it's the right time to do it. But we couldn't not offer that to our apprentices who also have a day out to go and study. So one of our developers is already out, but we still offered that extra. So that's a really big deal that we've lost that extra day, but we know we will get that back. And I do think there's an element of loyalty with that, knowing that you've willingly allowed someone to still do that and not reduce the amount of time that they're studying.
Okay, a few quick fire questions about hybrid working and the changes to working practices. So 4-day week, that's a full commitment from Mesma.
Full commitment. It's contractual change, so not a you can do it and we don't really mean it. It was a contractual change. Carole, my business partner, led on that. It took about 12 months, to get it to the point of saying actually how can we make this work in practice, and then got to it and thought let's just we've got to do this at some point.
But you don't want to do it.
No. I didn't want to do it, couldn't do it.
So you're still 5 days?
Yeah, but I'm all right with that.
That's your choice?
Yeah, it's my choice. And actually, that's okay. You know, that's okay that it's my choice. Sometimes I think maybe it would be easier to have a 4-day week, but I've got school holidays to think about, and you know, I've got different. I prefer the flexibility in the week rather than having to be off on, say, a Friday and be thinking I could be getting on with work and not working on a Tuesday, because I've got more flexibility.
If you looked at a software developer job with Mesma, like for like with a software developer job at a very large public sector organisation in the North East, we can't pay that salary. We're not big enough to match that salary like for like. So you have to, as a small business, be more creative about how do we provide different things that might matter to someone more than the end salary. And for others it won't. You know, the salary will be everything. But there comes a point where you go, we're not going to be able to do that. And actually, the more we all try and do that, the more inflation goes, and they just add more because they can. And we can't do that. So you have to become more innovative and creative in how do we become a place to work. And that was one of the things that we were able to do.
You invested in office space here at Newcastle Helix, and a major part of that isn't just having your name above the door. It was because there was a central base for people to come and meet and share ideas. What are the advantages of that? Because there is still this debate about how do you get people to return to work and should you force them?
The advantages are kind of what you said in the question, which is there are lots and lots of examples where you can make a decision in the space of 30 seconds when you're sitting next to someone, in comparison to online where you create a meeting, bring people together. It's so much more efficient, I think, in the way that you can get work done. If you put our developers at this table, they would literally be shaking their heads at this point and saying it is the least productive way for them to work. Because you put the likes of me and Sally and Evan in a room who, the nature of our jobs, we want to talk and we're exploring ideas together, and the developers need silence and a very black room, you know, on their own at midnight. So it doesn't work for everyone, and that, I think, will always be the case with it. I can think of years ago having developers or similar roles work for me, and we had exactly the same issue. So it's not new. It's just the fact that we've seen a different way, and as technology has advanced, it's allowed that different way to happen in a much more practical way than it ever has been before. So that's number one, is about that opportunity to just sound ideas of each other and to speak and to have the conversations that would take longer otherwise. The other point being is that we would not have been able to take on apprentices or placements if we didn't have an office. The reason we took the office on was to allow that to happen. And actually there's some regulatory barriers to that as well. Whilst you're allowed to do it with apprenticeships, you can't do it with placements. They have to be done in person. There's a very small amount of them that you can do in a different way to that.
But you're working predominantly from home, Sally. So do you feel like you're missing out on the opportunity to innovate? You're missing out on the collaboration. You're missing out on the osmosis. All the creativity, fostering creativity.
I think you do miss out on it. I think there is, like Lou says, you know, when you're in a job where you are more creative. No, they're still very creative, but you're in the bit of the job where you have to have conversations about what your customers are talking about, where you're listening to their conversations and hearing about what themes are coming out of discussions with customers. I think that's really important.
So would you mandate, because of all that? I mean, that's a lot of benefits. Mm-hmm. Would you mandate then you should be in the office for, say, 2 days a week?
It's a really interesting question, and Carole and I have done that and then stopped that. because it wasn't working where we tried to force the number of days in. I think that's a really perfect example. It feels like, you know, we're coming back to earlier conversations we've had. It's a really perfect example of us also recognising that if we impose that when people's lives are happening in a way that is challenging for them, then we might lose that person.
Yeah, and so there has to be, so I see this issue as being like a temporary issue, and I plan to be back in the office in the next couple of months.
That would be your preference?
That's my preference, definitely. So it comes back to that thing about if somebody's life circumstances changed. I think 20, 30 years ago, there would have been very little flexibility, very little compromise, and after a period of HR process, you probably would have been disciplined, you know, for not being able to be in the office. It would have absolutely been the case, and I would have probably been on the other side of that process, you know, as a manager at the time. I think the world has moved on, thankfully, so much since then, and I think that because we do.
I think we are on the cusp of a much bigger problem if we don't really get to grips with how we get people into work because they want to be there, and we support them when they're in there, rather than us kind of going, oh, it's okay for some of you to do this, some of you to do that. There's a problem here already, it's going to get bigger.
And I think it's doing it from the off, isn't it? It's thinking about the right elements of hard infrastructure mixed with the right elements of soft infrastructure to make those communities that we talk about.
Yeah.
Just to wrap up, good work culture. Give me 3 things that would be either good things to you if you were looking for a new job, or a firm was doing something that you thought, right, that is good work culture, or red flags.
In the main, I've been incredibly fortunate with my career. If I put it down to one thing, it would be working for people or companies who allowed me to grow and had the confidence in me, and I guess the risk willingness to say, do you know what, you might mess it up, but it's all right if you do. I would put that bang in the middle of anywhere I would ever want to work. How do I know I'm going to be given that flexibility to do a great job without someone stifling that?
See, I don't think you see the culture of an organisation from the outside. I think it's really hard. I think companies can be particularly good at presenting an image of themselves as a veneer of having a really good culture. The world is different now as well, because we have things like Glassdoor, and we have it's much easier to know about the culture of an organisation externally than it was perhaps in the past. And I think that reputationally, I think that you do, particularly when you're in a small sector, I think you do get to hear about good and bad organisations that you could potentially end up working in.
There was a story not so long back of a millennial who went into a job, got through 5 rounds of interviews, and it was the final, this was it, the job was theirs. And then they just said to the guy behind the desk, well, but none of this furniture looks like it's been ecologically sourced. How do you respond to that? And there was no answer from behind the desk, and the person didn't take the job. Are they expecting, this was a company that had absolutely nothing to do with ecological furniture at all, but he didn't think it matched their values.
Yeah.
Is that a ridiculous decision to make? Whose side do you lean on there?
I don't think you can judge that person on making that's a decision for them. I think there is an argument of knowing which values you align yourself with.
If that company states very clearly, this is important to us, and this is one of the 5, 6 things in our strategic plan, and then he asks that question and says no, I would absolutely walk away from that business, because then it's veneer. Then it's not about what...
Quite literally.
And on that note, cha-ching!
Thank you.
Thanks, guys, for tackling such important and, let's be honest, emotional subjects today. Lou Doyle and Sally Forsyth of Mesma. So I agree that the dial is shifting on female-dominated workforces. The growing focus on gender pay gaps, and with it the needs and benefits of working mums. The impact of the menopause, that's also filtering into employment conversations. But the challenge that's only going to grow is that of parental care. How everyone, not just women, can be at their best at work whilst meeting the needs of their own elderly parents. Because this is a talent pool nobody can afford to lose. So however and wherever you're listening or watching Both Sides of the Desk, thank you. This is all about sharing ideas to create a more positive work culture for everyone. So please subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues. Data shows that positive work culture boosts productivity, reduces staff turnover, and makes people happier. What's not to love? Well, we'd love you to join the conversation too. Drop us a message on the socials for Newcastle Helix, whether that's LinkedIn, X, Facebook, Instagram, or the YouTube channel. We are all about collaboration here. So on that note, this video podcast was filmed with the help of the incredible team at the Looming building on the Newcastle Helix site. It was filmed and directed by Chris Taylor, filmed and edited by Jordan McDonald, mixed and mastered by Andy at Blast Studios, and produced and presented by me, Charlie Charlton. The concept emerged in collaboration with Di Gates of Connection Heroes. This is a development program all about the value of human connection at work. So coming up in the next episode of Both Sides of the Desk.
You've probably heard this phrase now, but in Newcastle we have a phrase, shy bairns getting out.
I am a cheeky boy.
From the happy team here at Newcastle Helix, see you next time.